Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are connecting from. I always start always the same way, because we have a global community, people from Nigeria, people from Texas, people from Florida, Massachusetts, and all over the place. So for those of you who are connected on our LinkedIn Live right now, please let us know where you are connecting from. Thank you so much for being here with us in the Hacking HR interview series that we have been rolling out for the past over the past few weeks. It's always a privilege to have you with us as well. And I also wanted to say that I shared a link which is on the chat in the LinkedIn Live for you to participate in the raffle of 5 of the Adaptation Advantage books by Heather and Chris. And we're going to be talking a lot about the book and many other things today. But if you want, just click on the link, enter your information, and a little later today you're going to be getting, if you won, you're going to be getting your book. So once again, thank you, everybody. Please let us know where you're connecting from. And Heather, Chris, what a privilege to have you both in here. How are you both doing?
Doing just great. Doing just fine. Thank you very much for having us. I'm coming from Boston today.
Absolutely. How about you, Chris? How are you doing?
I am getting a little squirrely with this shelter in place. It's been gone a couple of months with a month to go here in California, but it's the right thing to do, and we're all safe and healthy. So happy to be with you this morning. Hope everyone else is doing well.
Thank you. Well, thank you for being here and taking the time to have this conversation. And we were talking offline about the timeliness of the book that you just put out, talking about adapting, learning, unlearning, relearning, things that, Heather, I've been following you for a long time. And these are things that ever since I started following you, probably a couple of years and a half ago, you've been talking about these things over and over and over again. And, it's amazing. There's a quote that says, everything has been said, but because nobody listens, we have to say them over and over and over again. And I think this book is a realization of all these conversations that you and Chris have led about learning and learning, creativity, innovation, and adapting because of the fast-paced world in which we are living in right now. So let's start the conversation by defining or by understanding a little bit better about what adaptation and what is adapting, specifically in the context of what the world is going through right now.
Okay, so a lot of times people confuse adaptation and flexibility. And flexibility is reaching into your toolbox to get a tool you've used before, likely to tackle a problem or a similar problem you've had before with a similar familiar process. That's flexing. Adaptability is reaching into your toolbox and pulling out a tool that's not fully formed yet, not fully forged yet, something that you have to make a customization to develop a new process to tackle a new challenge. So adaptation requires learning, where flexibility doesn't necessarily require learning. Adaptation also requires letting go of something, a prior process, a prior tool, a prior approach, an assumption about a problem. So it requires unlearning as well as learning. And that's why we think that the title is actually really apt for this particular moment.
Absolutely. And going through this crisis that we are, experiencing right now around the world, if you think about the things that we have to let go, and I'm not talking just necessarily on a personal basis, which I think there are a lot of things that we have to let go now that we got into this new reality, but from the perspective of the workplace and from the perspective of work practices, what do you think we should be letting go to start embracing, both flexibility, I think, but also adaptability to this new reality that we're living in and that we're gonna be getting into as we transition out of coronavirus, whenever that happens? Chris?
Yeah, I'll take that. I think that the first thing we have to let go of is the idea that everything needs to be held on to. And that the letting go is as much selective as it is universal. I think we've looked at the way we've always done things as our model for what we should do going forward. And the reality is, and going back to Heather's comments on adaptability, we really don't know what's coming at us. And so we have to be willing to drop something that has felt comfortable, that has felt right, in order to pick up a new way of doing things, a new way of thinking about things. So I think the first step in letting go is actually just recognizing that you don't have to hold on, and then being really selective about the things you're willing to drop in order to reach on and grab for something new.
Oh, that is fantastic. And, if you don't mind, I would love for you to tell us why adaptation is an advantage, for organizations and for people. I think the answer should be, perhaps, obvious, but not all companies do it and not all people do it. So what's the advantage of adapting or adaptation? What's the advantage of letting things go? What's the advantage of learning, if you will? I know, this sounds like a very basic question, but it's funny. I don't know if you've come across, some people like this, that they think that their careers, come to an end from the, from the learning perspective when they have been in the work force for, 20, 30, 40 years, and then there's nothing else to learn. So what is the advantage of adapting, learning, and letting things go?
If we're going back and forth, I'll take this one. We'll just take turns. Well, if you look at when we wrote the book, which is obviously pre-virus, we were really looking at the forces of technology and globalization rapidly reshaping work. And if you don't learn and you don't adapt, you're applying old thought to old problems that probably don't even exist anymore. And you're not taking advantage of the new opportunities that emerge when change accelerates. And what the virus has been is just an accelerant to that change. So we're going through a massive, really social experiment on a global scale. How much can we do digital? How much can we do remote? How much can a human being take being isolated and being separated, but connected only through digital technologies? We're figuring that out. The World Economic Forum had a report out yesterday or the day before that 29% of us can work from home. That's not everybody. That's not enough of us. Mm-hmm. So how are we adapting? The 29% of us, how are we adapting? How are those who are on the front lines going out there every day where, if you worked in a grocery store or you delivered packages or drove for Uber or any of those frontline workers, including healthcare workers, of course, in December maybe or November, we're not really sure when the virus got here, but say then before the virus got here, your job wasn't necessarily dangerous. It might have been some factors of danger. Now all of those jobs are suddenly dangerous. You suddenly could die from your workplace. That's a massive change that people are adapting to. They're adapting by wearing face masks and face shields and hand sanitizer and distancing themselves from people and contactless delivery in all sorts of ways. So adapting is essential for survival. When we wrote the book, it was really about technology and globalization as the forces of change that required adaptation, but it's equally, if not more relevant to this moment where the virus is causing us to adapt. And one of the things we're looking at now for future pieces and some articles we're working on is how many dimensions have changed. Who works, where you work, how you work, why you work. There's changes across all those dimensions. And how many of those things are stretched out, and they happen in the first couple of weeks. How many of them will snap back when we don't return to normal because we're instead going forward to a new normal? In that new normal, how many of us will still work from home? How much of learning will be online? How much will we socially distance? Some of these hand washing procedures may prevent spikes in influenza in the fall. So there's some really positive things coming out of this, but we're all adapting in somewhat a little bit blind right now, but we're doing it really, really well, I think.
Chris, do you want to add it? Do you want to add anything to that? Oh, go ahead,
yeah,
please.
I do. Because I think that the word that Heather used is the one that came to my mind as you were asking the question. The advantage to adapting is survival. And there are many examples in the book of businesses who have seen their whole industry shift, and those that were able to adapt are still in business today, and those who weren't able to adapt are no longer the powerhouses they were in the market. And there are many, many examples. But you also talked about our adaptability and learning, and it's true that we have this pattern of learning in the first, say, quarter of our lives, third of our lives, working for a big middle of our lives, and then kind of retiring and going off into the sunset. And often in that retirement phase, people will come back to learning again because they want to stay active and they want to stay engaged. And it's those people who actually thrive in their retirement. Now, why would we then not want to put learning in the middle of that chunk between those two ends of life so that we're thriving in our work and our career as well? And I think that's one of the things we want to advocate around the learning, unlearning, relearning process, is that it is about bringing new energy and new capability and new adaptability to every part of your life, whether it's your work career or we know that there are strong physical and psychological benefits to continuing to be a learner, continuing to be adaptable. And it really is about, if we were to sum it in a word, survival.
That's powerful. And I want to say just one message to people watching us on LinkedIn Live. The video seems to be a little stuck. I don't know what's going on. I think this is part of our adapting process to so many people working from home, and putting so much strain on the networks. The sound is coming out great, and so I apologize for that, Heather, Chris. So just in case, you can see the video later and it's a little stuck, but the audio is coming out great. So, and if anybody on the LinkedIn Live, if you have any questions, please post it on the chat, and we are happy to share. I'll be happy to share those questions with Chris and Heather. Let me go back to sort of a basic thing that happens in the workplace. Why, if adapting or adaptation is so important, like you said before, Chris, the advantage of adapting is survival. Why, if this is a fact, why is it so difficult for organizations to do it? Why is it so difficult for people to do it? Because this is not the first time these things are said, right? I mean, many companies were told, 25, 30 years ago, that with the advent of the internet and the retail, for example, the retail, brick and mortar retail space was going to have a harder time remaining the way it was. So they needed to adapt and they needed to change. However, many of them didn't do much. And now we see a lot of these companies going bankrupt, whereas Amazon, continues to lead the world in revenue and growth and whatnot. So why is it that it becomes so complicated for companies to embrace this basic truth of the advantage of adapting is survival?
Chris, you want me to take that one, or you want to take that one?
Yeah, why don't you start and I'll come in. I think we're going to both say the same thing, so I wanted to let you go.
Well, it's really hard to kill something when it's working, and we talk about this in the book. Disrupting yourself is really hard, but that's generally when most successful companies will launch something that disrupts their current business model at the height of their profitability, at the height of their scaling, at their height of their heyday. One of the examples we use in the book is that took about 40 years for the Walkman to reach 400 million units. The iPod did that in 13 years, but the iPhone did it in three years, I think it was. The interesting thing is they launched the iPhone at the absolute height of the iPod, knowing it was going to kill it. I mean, there still are iPods out there, but it went from 6 models to maybe 1 or 2 now, and most of the volume is in the iPhone. But you have to be willing to sort of kill your best idea so that the next one can thrive. And that, I think, is what most people struggle with. Well, how do you shut down a business when it's still generating profits and do something that disrupts it? Same thing with our skills. A lot of times we'll ride out our skills or our capabilities well past their expiration date, unwilling to sort of let go of that part of who we are, which we talk about a lot, the identity piece of it, and how those skills have made us feel comfortable and confident.
That is powerful, but I think it is just so complicated for anybody. I mean, not only at an organizational level, but at a personal level. To let things go, to let go of the things that are working. I mean, there are so many things in life that we can come back to them and say, like the way people eat, or the way they train, or the way they learn, and you tell them, that one thing is delivering value to you right now, that over time it's not going to deliver the same amount of value, and you got to change right now. I think those things are very complicated to embrace. So would you say if there is at all a sort of a recipe to be able to do that? I don't want to oversimplify neither your book nor the complexity of changing and adapting, but would there be like a recipe to sort of think through this process and be able to do it effectively?
Yeah, and we get at that in the book in both the individual level and the corporate level, so which is just a collection of individuals. And we say that you've got to focus on your why and how as opposed to your what. And for an individual, it's not what is your job, but what are you interested in? What's your purpose, your passion, your curiosity? And that's not something that you discover overnight. It's something you spend a lifetime uncovering. And that's your why. And then your how is, what are your superpowers? What are the things you're good at? How are you constantly adding, upgrading, discarding the hows when they're no longer relevant to the market environment in which you work? And then the what just becomes the application of skills and knowledge at a moment in time, knowing that that moment in time is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Time is compressing. And as an organization, we tend to focus on our brand and products, and product being any unit of value, when those are really just exhausts from our learning. They're evidence of our culture, evidence of our capabilities. So a brand is just an expression of our culture, and the unit of value, the product or service you provide, is really just evidence of your learning and your capabilities. And so we argue focus on the why and the how as individuals and as organizations. And as organizations, focus on the inputs, not the outputs. Focus on the culture and capacity, constantly nurturing the culture, constantly expanding the capacity, scanning the marketplace, scanning the horizon for what the new opportunity is, even if it disrupts your existing unit of value, because brand and products will work themselves out if you focus inward on those whys and hows. I don't know, Chris, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think the other piece of that is that it's really, really easy to see who you are or what your company is in the moment. And thinking about companies that are working on very short-term P&Ls, quarterly results, shareholder reports. There's this intense focus on the present and on the near future. And it's really, really difficult to look at mid or far future and think about how the business is going to adapt, particularly if it's performing well today. And so just reinforcing what Heather's saying here is that it's especially hard to look at near and far futures when things are changing so quickly that those are really blurry views. When you focus on your purpose, your reason for being, your mission for being, that doesn't change. That becomes the driver that makes it, again, easier to adapt, to adjust to these rapidly facing changes in order to again, let go of that thing that maybe seems very valuable now, but is going to ultimately be an anchor to the business or to you personally, unless you let that go and go embrace this new thing. But mission becomes and purpose become the guiding light that'll help you navigate through all of this change. Again, if you're willing to, and you have to be willing to adapt and let go of those things that won't serve you in that new future.
Chris, you have been working for 30 plus years in describing and envisioning the role of technology and the trends that are transforming the world today. You envisioned some of these things many, many years ago. I know you just said it, it's very difficult to know what's going to happen in 2 months from now when, even envisioning the next week is already complicated, things from the government perspective, the virus, the evolution of the virus and many other things, are all variables changing, what we could envision the future to be. But if you were able to say, very specifically, the things that you think will be different in the workplace going forward, and the new things that will be in place in the workplace once again going forward, what's your vision about that? What do you think we won't be doing anymore, and what do you think we didn't do before that we're going to start doing now, or like we're already doing, but we're going to keep them sustainable over time?
Well, I think there's some very practical things that are going to change. If we all were able to magically go back to work tomorrow, our workplaces will look very different. Right? Social distancing is mandating that. So the idea that there's a break room where everyone gathers, or that in the cafeteria 3 or 4 people sit around a table, those things are going to change. Our physical structures are going to change. Beyond that, though, I think, and more importantly even, is that a lot of our mental constructs have changed. A lot of the movement to work from home, or to move information, a better way to distribute management, to empower employees to make decisions and do what's right for the company, to kind of, if you will, let go of that micromanaging or overmanaging of people. Those things got shattered when people distributed to their homes and began to work in these kind of, as you said, these choppy video team meetings. We're learning to trust that people can get work done. We're learning that flexibility can make people more productive. We're learning that when we communicate more, even in sometimes flawed technology, we do better as a team. And when we are more human with one another, when we're able to acknowledge that you're trying to get work done, but the kids needs homeschooling, or as I fear right now that my dog will wake up and start to bark, that brings a humanity to the workplace that is different. It's, I think, building, we talk about this in the book, the critical importance of a psychological safety net in order to, for companies, for employees to thrive, to be able to bring new learning into the organization, to let go of old ways of doing things, to bring new ideas to the table. Their ability to fail and have that failure be a learning and not be punished for it. All of that requires a psychological safety that, interestingly, this kind of instant remote workforce has caused us to knit together pretty quickly. That's not perfect, but I think if we can bring that kind of empathy and humanity back to the workplace, that allows us to embrace each other as whole people as we come to work, the social distancing, pragmatic mask wearing, PPE engaging physicality of that change will be far less important than that psychological change that makes us feel safer and ultimately more productive in our work.
That is fascinating, and I think one of the elements that have come up very often through this crisis and because of all the changes that we're going through is this idea of psychological safety, which is not new, of course, like many of the things that are happening right now. But same thing with the idea of being more human at work and, bringing your authentic self to work and, empathy. None of these things are new, but because we were thrown into a reality that's, is unique for most people that are alive right now. I think, we are embracing this empathy and humanity and providing that psychological safety or, safe spaces of work to, experiment and, be your, have the dog barking in the background, and that's okay. That's the human thing. And that happens, right? Heather, I want to ask you one question about education, but before going there, I want to once again tell everybody who's connected on the LinkedIn Live, thank you so much for being here. If you haven't, let us know where you are connecting from. Please do that. Let us know in the chat where you are from or where you are located right now. And I have posted a couple of times a link to the raffle for 5 of the Adaptation Advantage books from by Chris and Heather that we're going to be sharing, that we're going to be raffling, after this session. Heather, part of your work for years has been education. And, I think a lot of the work around adapting, flexibility, innovation, creativity, curiosity comes down to, sort of the skills that you need to be able to do that effectively, right? So, part of the conversation of letting things go and doing new things and learning how to do those new things also comes back to sort of the idea about what happens with the skills that you learn through the process and what happens with the skills that you learn to do the things that you have to let go. Because I think very often people are afraid of letting something go because they think that they will also have to let go of the skills that help them do that one thing that they have to let go. So what do you think is the role of skills, capabilities in this process of, adaptability and learning, but also sort of not forgetting the place where we're coming from? I don't know if all that rambling there makes sense.
Sure. So I think one of the dangerous things we do is we set these occupational identity traps at a very young age. We ask little kids what they want to be when they grow up, and we ask them to pick things that are realistic. I tell the story in the book, and I often tell the story about my niece, Izzy. She was 4 years old. She had career day at school, which just frankly blew my mind. She called me up and said she wanted to be a unicorn. I said, that's great. She said, my teacher doesn't think so. She said that wasn't realistic. And now this was, I think, about 4 years ago now. So we're telling young kids to pick a future self based upon what's around them today, which is undoubtedly going to change before they even get into high school. And then we ask university students, if you go to university, to pick a future self based upon what you're exposed to in high school, mostly what you're told you're good and not good at in high school, what your parents' friends do and what's on TV. Very thin slice of life, doesn't prepare you for all the things you might actually be very good at. And then we ask you not to take anything outside of that major. The first thing we ask each other is, what do you do? And that's such a focus on application of skills and knowledge at a moment in time. And as we said earlier, that moment in time is getting faster and faster, particularly with this virus. So we use we use a lot of visuals in the book. I think there are 78 or 80 of them. And one of them is an iceberg. And at the top of the iceberg, out of the water, is skills to do. And you're going to change those all the time. Think about it like applications on your phone. You're going to use it as long as it's useful, delete it when it's not taking up too much space. It doesn't mean that skill wasn't important. And every skill you learn gets you better at learning the next skill, as long as you start getting uncomfortable unlearning. At the waterline, just below the skills, or I call them enablers, uniquely human skills. Some people call them soft skills. So the things that make you better at your job and frankly better in your relationships. So creativity, collaboration, communication, empathy, divergent thinking, all that stuff that frankly the robots aren't good at. And more of our attention needs to be focused on getting better at being human, which I think this moment is actually doing. As Chris pointed out, we're becoming more empathetic and relating to each other. We're showing up with more of our authentic selves. So I'm hopeful that will continue when the virus subsides. Below that is mindset. I have this concept called the Agile Learning Mindset, which takes Carol Dweck's growth mindset, that, the idea that we're not fixed and done. We're a work in progress, continuous work in progress. And it looks at agility, adaptability, market and self-awareness, and agency, that learning is your responsibility. And then at the base of that pyramid is identity. And it's moving away from a fixed occupational identity and more focused on a purpose-driven identity. So it goes from why to how, and then all the way up at the top of the pyramid to what. And that's how we think people need to be thinking about it. But right now, all our systems of learning are a factory pipeline to work. And a lot of times they're to jobs that may not be there, certainly won't exist in the same way. And poorly preparing people for adaptation, because it's setting up this idea that we're going to download skills into you and make you a deployable workforce without having the need to discard them, adapt, unlearn, relearn, stay connected to your purpose, because that's what's going to motivate you to learn and adapt for life.
That is powerful. And it's so interesting that a lot of the skills that we're talking about these days are very often intrinsically human skills. Being curious is something that we do when we were born, and that gets educated out of us. Like I think Sir Ken Robinson says that very often. Yeah. We are all creative until it gets educated out of us, through formal education, when we are taught to just follow the rules and follow what the teacher says, rather than letting us, sort of continue to develop that ability. And I think it was in 2015 that Michael Dell, CEO of the company, said, he was asked, what do you think is the most important skill for the CEOs of the future? And he said, without a doubt, curiosity. Because, like the answer to the questions that already have been asked are out there on Google. But now you got to learn how to ask new questions that will unveil new ideas, new knowledge, and help you adapt, so to speak. So it's so interesting to me that we're talking about all these things that are so intrinsically human, and we have to reteach them, because we forgot that muscle is weak right now, if you will. Yeah. How do you teach that, though? How do you teach curiosity? How do you teach people to use their imagination? How do you teach people to to be creative? Is that teachable?
Yeah, I think it's teachable. My undergraduate degree is in industrial design, which is basically the foundation of design thinking. Mm-hmm. And I think we need more of that at the K-12 level, through high school, in university, in certain circumstances. So it's, instead of focusing on finding the right answer, which is too much of what we're doing, because if the answer is known, we don't need to all find it, unless it's a process of learning a skill to teach us how to learn. Solving the problem, that's good. It's helpful to learn to solve problems, but it's really helpful to learn how to find and frame new problems. And that's what a lot of what design thinking does. It, jump into the ambiguity, figure out where the opportunities are, figure out where the users are, what they need. And that's what really good companies are doing right now, is they're saying, what's the need? What are we good at? And how do we get there? It's adaptation steroids right now.
Yeah. Chris, you want to add something?
talking with an educator not so long ago, and he said, he's an official in a school, a superintendent of schools, and he said, I tell my teachers that if the question can be answered by asking Siri or asking Alexa, then it's not a good question. And that resonated, but a teacher in the conversation said, well, why? And in both of those things, I heard sort of the past and present and future. The future think is, if we can just look it up, it's not a good question because we can just look it up. We don't need to retain that information necessarily. And that's because we need to be better at asking the right questions to get to appropriate answers. The teachers, I think, firmly rooted in a present and past, that is, that I get rewarded for my kids doing well on standardized tests. My career depends upon an outcome that is students being able to recite back facts and figures. So there's, I think, Heather's absolutely right. We need to shift our learning away from, standardized answers to, extremely uncomfortable, sometimes ambiguous question finding. But to do that, we're going to have to break some systems, and we're going to have to be willing to break some systems in our education, and also I think in our workforces. When we expect people to come in for an interview and have the exact right answer about where they see themselves in 5 years, and hope that that aligns with some future strategy deck about where the company's going, that's answer finding. It's not problem finding. It's not creative. We need to start thinking about how we talk to our candidates in a way that is about how do they think, how do they apply new information, how do they change and adapt when a situation shifts. That's going to be a much stronger hire in an organization than someone who can rattle off the 5 principles of your future plan. So I think that we have to be willing to start with breaking what we know won't work for us in the future. And admittedly, that's going to be very hard to do.
Love it. That's a little bit of a Schopenhauer in there, some creative destruction, going forward and trying to, break the systems and do and redesign them. But, we're going to be, I want to bring some of the questions from the audience. Before getting there, I do want to ask you, do you think, we had the Spanish flu, we had, swine flu, we had the Ebola crisis, now we're in coronavirus. And, if you look through history, it seems that always we increased, like incrementally a little bit, there was a little bit, we're a little bit better than we were before. But this crisis is showing the incredible gaps that we have in the world, the fragility and the vulnerability of the systems that we have in place. Do you think this is the crisis that will guide us to say, one day, I don't know when, but one day, hopefully, in the next few weeks, to say things can't be the same as they had been before, as they were before, because they were not working. We got to do something different. Do you think this is the crisis that will determine that sort of new thinking to break those systems and to do things differently going forward?
Yeah, I certainly do. I wrote a Forbes article about this. I've been talking about this quite a bit. I think that this is the third existential threat or challenge of our lifetimes. The first being climate change, the second being income inequality, especially in the developed world, and particularly in the United States, and this third one being a global pandemic. So we have had at least 50 years of knowledge that the climate is warming, and that's due to human activities. And we have yet to really curb those human activities in any meaningful way, except this virus is causing us to. The second is income inequality. Since under every administration, not Republican and Democrat, it's not a left or right thing. Since about 1970, our Gini coefficient, which is a measure of income inequality, if you had 100 people and $100, if everybody had $1, the Gini coefficient would be 0. If one person had $100 and 99 people had no money, the Gini coefficient would be 1. And we've gone from about 0.4 to about 0.49 in 50 years, which brings us to the highest level that we had since the Great Depression. So in this particular global pandemic, we're doing something really interesting. First and foremost, we've paused the economy to protect our most vulnerable. Our most vulnerable are our older populations, people with underlying health conditions. Now, granted, we don't really understand how the virus affects everybody yet, but the majority of the deaths by far are people over, over a certain age or with underlying health conditions. And we've decided to put them and our healthcare system above our profits. And it's not a simplistic binary decision, because when we freeze our economy, we create a world of hurt, and we're in a world of hurt. But we can't this opportunity, particularly as we're starting to appreciate people who've always showed up every day to make the world work for us in a way that we didn't before. Our healthcare workers, our essential workers, our delivery drivers, our taxi drivers, our bus drivers, our grocery store workers, all those people that just every day make the economy work for all of us, make society work for all of us. We're finally looking in the eye and saying thank you. And where we couldn't pay them $15 an hour last fall, now we're paying them $19 an hour without question.
Yeah.
Will that continue? We're providing sick pay for gig workers because it's suddenly not a me thing, it's a we thing. If I took an Uber in the fall and I didn't care about my Uber driver, I wouldn't care whether they had sick pay or health insurance. Now I sure do, because I don't want them driving me around if they're sick. If I'm just selfish about it, I don't mean that's how I feel particularly, but I'm saying one. And now I think we're taking a different tact on that, and I'm hopeful it'll last. When we become whatever we're going to become next, we can make intentional decisions about where we fly and when we drive and how often we go into the office and how we use real estate and how much we encroach on natural habitats. I mean, these zoonotic outbreaks are on the rise because of biodiversity loss and human expansion into wildlife areas. That's been pretty well documented. So I feel like this crisis is the crisis that will force us to address the other two and emerge on this and the other side of it really in a better place. And I've been describing it in some of my virtual talks, like we're standing at the edge of a raging river. And all people can see are the eddies that are going to suck us in. And there are rocks there, and we've walked across part of the river, and we don't even realize we've done it. We've flattened the curve in many places. We've protected people in many places. And on the other side of that raging river is a series of paths that could be far better than the paths we were on, if we're just insistent and intentional enough to make it so. So I see a lot of positives in this, but I do think it's the third existential threat, and it's forcing us to look at the other two.
And I love that you mentioned the word being intentional. And this is very important for at least part of the work that I'm doing. And it is always encouraging people to be intentional, to speak up, to talk about the things that matter, because, it's not just the government. Whether it is good or bad government in this country or in any other country, it is about speaking up about the things that matter and will matter going forward. Because if we go back to the way things were before, which is one of the things that really scares me, all of this pain and suffering would have been in vain. And I'm hoping that we are in a much better place. But to do that, we have to be collectively intentional and speak up about the things that matter. Like, it's unbelievable that 26 million people in the United States lost their jobs in 5 weeks and they don't have health insurance anymore, when this is the only country among the OECD countries where that happens. That, we got to come together, Republicans, Democrats, or people in, whatever countries they are, get together and leave, like you said before, Heather and Chris, leave those things behind, their dogmas, their pre-assumptions about how things should be in their minds, and come together and discuss about these things. I mean, I'm sure that better ideas will come out of all of us discussing about what's important for us and how to make it happen, rather than continue to be entrenched in positions that are obsolete by now. We're going to go into Chris, go ahead, and then we're going to go into a lightning round of questions from the audience.
All right. Well, I would just add, Enrique, to that, in that, people keep talking about we're going to go back to, when we get back to normal. And we talked earlier about needing there to be a disruptive force that really changes our thinking. This episode has been exactly that. It has laid bare many problems with our infrastructure, with our social structures, with our healthcare system. And I don't think that there are many people who want to go back to the way it was in January. I think there are people who want to go forward to collective problem solving, forward to, I am pretty sure that all of those parents who thought that teachers weren't working hard enough are pretty sure that teachers need a raise. I'm pretty sure that, and we're actually even seeing it, the people who think healthcare for all is a socialist meme that will destroy America are now actually rallying around provisions, what remain of the ACA, so that health insurance can get to those newly unemployed.
Yeah.
We're actually seeing an incentive to move forward and fix many of the systemic problems because they were laid so horribly bare in these last 3 months that we know that we cannot be a healthy and productive society if we don't fix those. So I'm very hopeful that what comes from this is a prolonged understanding of, we're able to plaster over a lot of problems in society and infrastructure that we can't now. So do we want to keep trying to walk across that creaky bridge, or do we want to repair it so that we can all cross it in a better way?
Absolutely.
I think we're seeing that that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think just to summarize what Chris just said is I think it's really a shift from thinking about what's good for me versus what's good for we, and realizing what's good for we is actually good for me too.
Yeah.
We never saw it before, but this virus is making that evident. Having good teachers, having good broadband infrastructure, having universal healthcare. Somebody else has healthcare, they're going to get a vaccine and they're not going to infect me. It's actually good for me. When somebody's kid learns and becomes a contributing member of society, GDP grows where it wouldn't if I just saved my money and didn't invest in that kid who isn't mine, because it's good for me, the we.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things that the world always say about our American society is how individualistic and it could be. But it's really interesting that in times of crisis, and now with the coronavirus, but also in 2008 and also in 9/11, people got together. There were pockets of people, like there are always pockets of people, hating each other, and I don't even understand why. But the overwhelming majority of everybody else, wants to help each other out, and they want to do what's right. And we can't continue to be in this mental gridlock of you're a Republican, I'm a Democrat, you are healthcare for all is socialist, and if we increase taxes, then it doesn't trickle down. So all of these things are just ridiculous, and they may have worked 100 years ago, but they don't work in this society anymore. So
Right.
sort of the encouragement to these people making decisions is to take advantage of adapting, like we're talking about in the book. We're going to get into a lightning round in the few minutes that we have left
Okay.
of questions. You're going to love this question. I think, particularly you, Heather. How do you recommend educators to adjust their curriculum to help students develop the skills that they need to develop in order to be able to adapt?
Far less focus on finding the right answer and far more open-ended. Find a good question. Surprise me. I remember when I was building the College of Design, Engineering, and Commerce at Philadelphia University, we had so many students, high school students, coming out with the first question they would ask, is this going to be on the test? And so we devised a course called Integrated Design Process, where basically we came in, we took people to a broken down train station and said, tell us what the problems are here. There was no right answer. They had to find the question. We need much more stuff like that, where you follow your own curiosity and you come up with the questions and you propose the solutions. Much more inquiry, much more propositional thinking, far less finding the right answer.
Fantastic. Another question. What do you recommend people to do in order to adapt when we are going through so much stress and uncertainty and difficulty? So what's your recommendation for people to not only embrace the skills to adapt, but to adapt, as a concept?
One of the things I'm saying right now, particularly in this moment, is give yourself a break. This is really, really hard. I struggle some days. Chris struggles some days. I know she has to listen to me because she's, unfortunately for her, a friend of mine as well. It isn't easy on any of us. We don't know where it's going, but think about ways in which you can let go of things that are not working. Think about in grief. If you lost a job, grieve the loss of that job. You just lost income status, part of who you are. You need to give yourself time to do it. And then with time, start thinking about, what am I interested in? What are the things I'm good at? Where can I find ways to add to those things that are my superpowers and that stoke that curiosity and purpose and passion inside me? But give yourself a break. This is not a time to beat yourself up. It's just not.
Love it.
And I know we're in the lightning round, but I'm going to inject this one too. Remember that you've never been in better company to do this, because everybody's going through this. So, this sense that I've got to hide behind some stoic exterior and question my ability to adapt may have been true in a corporate workplace 3 months ago. Today, everybody's doing that. So we can all screw up together, and get great forgiveness for things that go a little bit aside, but I think discover amazing things along the way. So, you know, we really are all in this together, and that means the struggle as well. Give yourself a break, as Heather says, and be okay with experimenting, with screwing
And
up, because everyone's doing it around you.
yeah, and recognize the things you've already done. In the first 2 weeks, schools went entirely online. Parents became workers and teachers and babysitters and everything at once. You're doing a tremendous amount. So stop for a second. That's why I always use the river analogy, because you have made some steps across that raging river. Look back at the shore behind you. It's not as grassy as you remember it. And you are partway through the river, and you are doing a fantastic job.
That is amazing. One of the things that I have been telling leaders to, to put as part of their repertoire of all the things that they are doing right now is, just be human. Just come to your teams and tell them, I don't have the answers. I don't know. I don't know what we're going to do. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And that's okay. I mean, you don't have to be, like you said before, Chris, you don't have to be the stoic leader, just sort of raising a flag and saying, I have all the answers, just follow me. I think we are in a period of extreme uncertainty when a lot of us don't really know what's going to be happening next week. And when you show yourself that human, you will probably encourage others not only to be human, but also to help you find the answers to those things that you don't know. And I think that's so critical right now, when it comes to leadership. There's one question about, it's not a question, it's actually a comment, but, the role of fear in this, sort of process of adapting. So what do you think the role of fear is, and how to, embrace fear? Because, you got to be okay with that, but overcome it, if you will.
I think you just have to acknowledge that, we're all a little bit afraid right now. We just don't know how long this is going to last, when it's going to change, what our economy is going to look like, who in our lives we might lose. So acknowledge that fear exists, but don't let it be your hostage. Don't let it be the person that, the thing that keeps you hostage, because nothing does well in the panic zone. So we talk about the learning zone, the comfort zone, the panic zone, or the apathy zone is also another one. Acknowledge that fear exists, acknowledge that these are scary times, and then just focus on the things you can control, the things that you can make incremental movements. And every day, look, my father taught me that when I was young, declare success every day. What's the thing you did today to make tomorrow better than yesterday? And don't let fear be your prisoner, but acknowledge that it exists, and we're all afraid, and talk about it if you have somebody to talk about it with. I hope you do, because it's really important to connect with other humans right now.
I love that. And, we are in sort of a borderline between feeling powerless or potentially feeling powerful. And I, like you just said, Heather, I've been telling people, if you think about the things you can control and influence, you're powerful because you can make a change in there. But if you think about the things that you can't do, like solve coronavirus, I mean, nobody individually will be able to do that. Then you're going to be powerless in that space.
Right.
So it is doing the things that you can actually do. My last question for you is, as we wrap up this conversation, I don't want to oversimplify, but I always ask a similar question. What is the one thing, maybe one or two things that you would recommend people to sort of do now or go away with to embrace this idea of adaptability and adaptation as an advantage for themselves individually, but also for their organizations? One or two things that may be very practical, if you will.
I'll take one, and then Chris can take one. I'll say, the first line in the book is a quote by Dan Gilbert, who's a psychologist at Harvard, who says, human beings are a work in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. And we're really good at remembering and really hard at imagining. So know that this is just a moment in time in a much longer arc. We don't know where we're going. Your future is most likely much brighter than it is today, with a ton of really fun adventures in front of you. Be open to them, and just realize you're a work in progress, and you may have some trouble imagining how it might come out, but just be open to it, and don't be afraid.
Awesome. Grace?
Yeah, and I would just say really practically, think about what you bring to your work that is not anywhere in the job description, because I think that's who you are. That's starts to speak to your center. Your job description may be, we have an example in the book of someone who is a school administrator who, his job description has a lot of detail in it, but nowhere did it say, crisis management when an elementary school burned over a holiday weekend and he had to redistribute students and teachers and communicate with parents and do that all in 48 hours so kids could go to school on Monday. that's an incredible skill set that he would never think to apply to something else. And it was nowhere in his job description when he was interviewed and hired. We all have tons of those things in our life where we bring something into the workplace that is never in our job description, but is so fundamentally who we are. Those are the things to focus on and understand where they can be applied in new and adapted ways.
Love it. I have somebody who recently told me, I have a podcast about soccer, but I work in HR and I don't put it on my LinkedIn. And I said, do put it on your LinkedIn. You know how difficult it is to put a podcast together? I mean, how many people would love the fact that you can do that and you're putting yourself out there? That is such a fantastic skill to have in the HR space. So she was so encouraged to do it. So I love that, Chris, because, you know, we are more than our resume or our work is. So everybody, well, Chris, Heather, thank you so much for sharing your insights and thoughts about adapting, what's going on right now, looking forward to the future. Everybody who's connected online, thank you so much for being with us here. I just posted again the link to the 5 books we're going to be raffling. And I apologize, it's just in the United States because, well, you know, we send this book via Kindle and we can only send it within the US. If not, please just look it up yourself, The Adaptation Advantage by Heather and Chris on Amazon. And, you know, fantastic content, all of these ideas developed in the book. So please check it out. And Heather, Chris, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks a lot for
inviting us.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Okay.
Stay safe.